So I put off talking about the CHP report because of multiple reasons. Firstly, I find myself angry with Kiely's parents, Kiely's family, because to me it still seems like a case that has been really badly botched, and a case where at the very least an 18-year-old girl supplied a 16-year-old girl with alcohol and possibly drugs throughout the night and has gotten away with that. No charges laid. But to me, there was so much more than just an 18-year-old providing alcohol to another underage child. And to me, there are people who are responsible for Kiely's death. I don't believe that Kiely drove herself into the reservoir. So I get angry that her parents have just let this whole thing go, and that they seem to have accepted this narrative that she drove herself into the reservoir. Everyone said Kiely was a responsible girl. Everyone said she was a smart girl. She knew the area. And yet they just turned around and accepted it. So part of my reason for not wanting to touch this was because I was so angry. And then there was the confusion. I saw the part where they talked about, and even this from SF before we saw the CHP report, where we're told, well, there were visible tyre tracks going into the reservoir. And that caused confusion for me. Were we just completely wrong? It made me wonder if maybe Kiely did drive herself into the reservoir and we've just been prolonging this whole thing for 2 years for no reason whatsoever. And then I go back to all the things that don't add up. And I start getting angry again. And I think, how is this happening? How is it possible that there is no justice happening for this child? How is it possible that an entire community are going to sit back and accept this bullshit? Because that's what it is. And you have the likes of Megan Cole, who come out and start attacking people and trying to destroy people who continue to question this case. Why is there so much hatred towards people who want to question the things that don't add up in Kiely's case? To me, that says that we're not supposed to question it. But then I think, well, here's the problem. All the reports that we've been privy to are telling us it was an accident, nothing to see here, walk away, folks. And I feel frustrated. I feel like there's nothing we can do to stop this. And for me, as an Australian, there are some limitations on what I can do. There's no point in me as an Australian trying to write to a senator somewhere and say there is something really wrong with this case. Because I'm an outsider. And look, as much as I love my American friends, I know that there are so many Americans who have this sense of superiority. This sense that we don't want to hear from an outsider telling us what to do. And I know I'm going to offend people by saying that, but it's the way I see it. And of course, there's also the problem that for me, there are so many government web pages that I cannot access. I am blocked from accessing them because I am outside of the United States. So for me, there is that frustration that I really can't do much by way of taking this further. and trying to get more authorities looking at this case and seeing that this case is so screwed. So for me, when I first looked at the report, my first reaction was, well, it's all over. What's the point? We've failed. We can't do anything more. But then I realised that that is exactly what they want from us. They want us to look at the report and walk away. They're hoping that it'll have the same effect as when the fire cams were released. That certainly got rid of a lot of content creators who had been screaming about the things that didn't add up and saying, well, hang on, no, this doesn't seem right. And I think they've decided, well, let's give validity to the fire cams by adding them into this report, and I will have more to say about that soon. And let's also add in some tyre tracks so that people can't argue with that. But there are so many things about this report that when you start to look at it, just aren't right. Now, my first observation, I've read through the report twice now, and I've not really gone in depth. Like, I've not really taken a lot of time to really look into the things that have been said here. It's just been a straight read through twice. The first thing that comes to mind about the report itself and about CHP and this MAIT team is, what the hell? I had the impression from so many sources that these MAIT teams were like the cream of the crop. These were like supermen when it comes to accident investigation. You know, they had this almost godlike knowledge and skills when it comes to accidents. And I expected a report to reflect that. And I guess part of that is me doing comparisons with the accident investigation teams that we have in Australia, because there are some pretty damn top-notch accident investigation teams. They are directly linked to state police in each state, and they are specially trained for that job, and they are cream of the crop. And for that reason, you see so many prosecutions that occur in Australia with accidents because they've been thoroughly investigated and it's come up as there being some sort of criminal offence. One example of that is we have just had a ruling in Sydney where a bus driver has been jailed for life over the death of 10 people who they had just left a wedding, and he lost control of the bus going round a roundabout, flipped the bus onto its side, and 10 people died. And I won't go into that all. You can look it up. If you look up Sydney bus driver jail sentence or whatever, then you can find the case and it will explain it all. But they thoroughly investigated every element of that accident, and they came up with a conviction for this guy, which, you know, it doesn't give the families back the people they've lost, but it does serve justice. And I thought that these CHP MAIT teams, from everything I had heard, I thought that they would be on par with those sorts of investigators, that they would have the skills, the technical skills, and the ability to think things through logically and to actually research things, not make presumptions. And yet I look at these two reports and I think, heck, you could get some college kid to do these reports and they'd probably do a better job. So I don't know if this is just that the Valley Division of CHP are just pathetic, or if CHP and their MAIT teams are just seriously overrated and they don't know how to do proper vehicle investigations. Maybe it's just that they lack the experience to do investigations when it comes to accidents in water. Maybe they're just lazy, or maybe they've been paid off. But I look at this report and it is pathetic, basically. So I'm going to just go through my notes, and I'm not going to go deep into anything because I am going to come back and do separate videos about separate things, because there are a lot of things in this that just make me question the whole thing. So, like I said, I'm just going to go through my notes and the issues that I have with this report. So, the first thing I saw, which was interesting. Now, they did an orthomosaic map. And what that basically means, so they did that with a drone, that is more accurate than a satellite image. So it is, yes, it is a compilation of images all put together, but it's done digitally. It's corrected as it is done digitally. There's GPS data involved, so it is going to be more accurate than a satellite map. So when we look at that image, it doesn't line up with the Google Earth map. And that's to be expected. But here's my problem. Why have they only done that orthomosaic map of part of the area that they are discussing? They've only done one strip, and yet they discuss a route that was supposedly taken by this vehicle, which they have not mapped. So that causes me to question why they didn't do that. Maybe it's not significant, but to me it is. Because when they're talking about specific tracks and specific routes, I want to be able to see that route from beginning to end. And yet with the two maps not lined up, it makes it harder for me to see what they are talking about. Moving on. So they're saying that after all this time, or after 2 weeks, they suddenly get a video from a CHP aircraft that happened to record tyre tracks going into the water. There were dozens and dozens of aircraft that went over that reservoir. There were crews on the ground. And you're telling me that nobody saw these tracks. And yet apparently they could find it on video from, conveniently, their own aircraft. And the tracks are so faint that they have to actually enhance the image to show you the tracks, which are still so faint that they're hard to see. Here's my question. We've been told that helicopter pilots have said they could see the bottom of the reservoir. And here we are, they're saying we can see these tracks that were pretty much invisible. And we're going to enhance this image of these tracks that were pretty much invisible. So did they not also try and look at the video for images of the vehicle? Because we know that after the water level dropped, that the vehicle was really, really visible to the naked eye. So surely it should have been also visible in this image where they could find these virtually invisible tyre tracks. Yeah, the water level was higher, but there's actually a video where I discussed this. When you look at the angle of the vehicle and the depth at the lowest point as opposed to the depth at the highest point, at the very, very least, the top portion of the vehicle should have been visible from the air based on what was visible on the day that they recovered it. The next thing that concerns me, these guys are meant to be professionals, and yet apparently they couldn't take measurements of the tyre tracks. They couldn't figure out location and dimensions for the tyre tracks from the aerial video. So they're saying, yeah, there's tyre tracks here, but we can't tell you if these tyre tracks are actually the right size to match with Kiely's vehicle. We can't even tell you if we're being accurate in terms of the precise location of these tyre tracks. But we're going to tell you that they're in a direct line to the vehicle, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Now, I know a few people were confused just from the little bits that I heard. A few people were confused about them saying 60 foot from the shoreline, but it does say from the 6th of August shoreline. That is saying that the shoreline has receded by 10 foot. Is that correct? Possible? Looking at the map that they show, none of these figures seem to add up. But I do need to actually have a better look at all this. Like I said, this is just at first glance. So now you have this other problem here. You have a map from the day of the recovery of the vehicle, an approximate location of the tyre tracks. But to me, they don't seem to correspond. I will look into that more, and maybe it's just at first glance I'm not fully comprehending what they're trying to show me, but it doesn't seem to quite match their image of where they say the tyre tracks were when the vehicle went in, and then them trying to mark it on the image from the day that the vehicle was recovered. They don't quite seem to correspond. And like I said, when you look at their map of the shorelines, I'm not sure that that is a 10-foot difference. And yet we're told that the car was 50 foot from the shoreline. That is possible, of course, that Adventures with Purpose were just approximating and that it wasn't quite 50 foot or that it was more than 50 foot from the shoreline. But when you look on the data, it doesn't seem to fit with the distance that was cited with Adventures with Purpose. So something doesn't match up here. But at the same time, the thing that worries me is while they're still struggling with distances and everything, they're saying that they could not determine the depth that the Honda was at on the day it was recovered. Like, duh! That tells me straight up they've not looked at any of the footage from Adventures with Purpose. They've clearly not even communicated with Adventures with Purpose. which leads to the next problem. When they have that image of the car and they're showing the damage and they're marking damage that was done during recovery of the vehicle, which every man and his dog knows that's when that damage occurred. But they don't, because they've clearly not looked at any of the footage from Adventures with Purpose. They've clearly not done any comparisons with footage taken by Adventures with Purpose, footage. They claim that Nevada did video footage underwater, and yet they haven't done a comparison with the vehicle underwater as opposed to the damages that they are looking at on the vehicle. That is just simple, basic detective work, if you ask me. Like, how can they do that? There's no mention of the window being wound down in the back. There's no mention of two windows being broken out. They only mention one window being broken out. So their discussion of the damage to the vehicle doesn't even add up. Clearly, they have not sourced any of the AWP footage. They have not spoken to any of the AWP team. And because of that, they've got inaccurate information in this report. Now, they claim that the damage to the vehicle was done when it settled on the bottom of the reservoir. This is a reservoir with a muddy bottom, and I can understand that perhaps as the vehicle turned turtle, then yes, the front end would have been headed straight down first, and perhaps the 2 points of contact would have been the front of the bonnet and the top of the roof. So that makes sense to me, but the damage doesn't. There's a line. There is a distinct line on the bonnet. On the left-hand side of this dent that they claim occurred from the bonnet settling on the bottom of the reservoir, there is a distinct line, like something has backed onto that bonnet. Something with a line on it. Something with a solid metal box or something has backed onto that bonnet and caused that distinct line on there. Looks like there's probably a line on the other side. It's hard to tell because it's not a great photo. But I remember distinctly Jared Lysek talking about the broken out window, the original broken out window, and saying that that would not have occurred underwater, because once the vehicle starts sinking, it's cushioned by the water and it's settled on mud. So you're telling me that it's not enough of an impact to break a side window, but it's enough of an impact to destroy a windscreen like that? That confuses me too, and I am going to do a video on that. They talk about the engine being in neutral. In the mechanics report, it is clearly stated the engine is in neutral. So why are they saying that speed was a factor? Maybe, hypothetically, when the vehicle entered the water, it then got put into neutral. But I just question that. I find that odd. One thing that is significant to me and tells me that the keys were in the ignition is, according to the mechanical report, there was water in the intake manifold. So the car was running when it went in the water. And of course you look at the image and you can see that the wipers were engaged when the vehicle went in the water. So to me that says that there was definitely someone in the driver's seat of that vehicle when it went in the water. Unless it happened to go in the water during a time when it was raining, then it seems to me that perhaps that vehicle has gone in the water and the first reaction has been to turn the wipers on. That could, of course, point to perhaps it was an accident. But then so many other things don't add up. So I don't know. That is the one thing that is a little bit confusing for me. But I guess if someone was trying to get the vehicle into the water, maybe they had turned the wipers on for that reason. Or maybe, I don't know. But to me, it is interesting that the wipers were on when the vehicle was going in the water, clearly. Another thing that I found interesting was the fact that you had 3 tyres at 30 psi. And supposedly the front right tyre was at 38 psi. That's the tyre where we look at the images and something seems really odd. It looks really warped. To me, I would have actually thought that I would have expected there to be less air in that tyre. But 38 psi is a huge difference. And I do need to go back and have a look at that image and see if that's what we are seeing in that image. But that makes me think, now, supposedly she was impaired. Supposedly she drove her vehicle in a dead straight line, straight down into the water, with one tyre that was overinflated. Have you ever been out somewhere and one of your tyres has been at a different weight than the others? You don't drive in a straight line. You have to really work on the steering wheel to keep it running straight. You need to go and fix your tyres. So apparently she was totally impaired, according to their report. And yet she managed to drive a dead straight line with a dodgy tyre. That to me doesn't quite add up. Now, I do want to point out that they have pointed out there were no applicable recalls. Because I know a lot of people tried to claim that, well, maybe there was something wrong with the gears and maybe it slipped out of gear and it rolled in because she tried to sleep on the bank of the thing and yada yada. There were no applicable recalls for her vehicle. There was nothing wrong with it mechanically. So we can put all that to bed. Now, how is it that you've got this onboard diagnostic system still able to provide data, and yet the event data recorder, which is essentially the black box, the thing that should be, more protected and more watertight, etc., how is it that that was screwed and yet the whole onboard diagnostic system still worked? That confuses me, and I do need to look into that more because I need to know what is going on there. And the other issue I have with this whole report is the lack of photos. They have several pages where they list hundreds of photos. And yet we get, one photo of the vehicle? And then we get a few aerial images? Where are the rest of the photos? We're only being told part of the story here. what we are being told is complete utter bullshit. And speaking of bullshit, let's talk about the wildfire cameras. Now, I find it incredibly coincidental that the source, the original source where content creators heard about this wildfire cameras was, you guessed it, SF Investigates. He supposedly emailed all these content creators, here's a link to these wildfire cameras. This proves it was an accident. See, you can see the vehicle going in the water. And now, the first time that we hear from any authorities, any kind of reference to these wildfire cameras, comes from CHP. And hey, what a coincidence. They provided SF with an unredacted report ahead of releasing the report. Doesn't that just sound a little wonky to you? There's something seriously screwy going on there. And look, I will say it till I'm blue in the face. There is something seriously wrong with those wildfire cameras. I can't believe that this organisation actually based a report on them without actually trying to investigate and find out if what they were looking at was actually correct. Why have they not questioned the apparent absence of all the other vehicles from the party? Why are they satisfied to accept that there were only 2 vehicles around at 12:30 at night when she happened to drive herself into the reservoir? And this doesn't match with accounts by campers who talk about a mass exodus of vehicles at 12:30. Where's that on the camera? So I have serious issues with them using that and claiming that that proves without a doubt that, oh, it's all an accident. Look, here we go. Because there are so many things there. And I've said this over and over. And I will talk about this in another video. But here's the thing. They describe the movement of the vehicle in the fire cams. This does not match with what they claim in terms of how the vehicle entered the water based on their tyre tracks that they show us. Now, in their weather data and everything, they talk about no rain, but they have no wind recordings, and that is significant because that's going to affect movement of the water. That is going to affect movement of the vehicle when it enters the water. There's also nothing here about currents in the Prosser Reservoir. And it seems to me, I have looked, I can't find any sites that actually record any currents in Prosser Reservoir, which is frustrating because they were releasing water from the reservoir on a daily basis. They also had creeks and rivers running into that reservoir. There had to be currents in that reservoir. They've not recorded that, and that is significant when it comes to their claims that the car had basically ended up in a direct line from where it went into the water. Because wind and currents are going to affect where that car ends up, how that car floated for 60 metres or 60 feet or whatever it was, and then ended up on the bottom. You need to factor in currents and wind, and they haven't done that. One thing that was a major red flag to me, and if anyone can point me in the direction of this recording, I'd be incredibly grateful. There is a recording somewhere where Megan Cole talks about, well, they can't actually find out how drunk she was because there was no more blood in her system. Now I'm paraphrasing there. But that is essentially what she said. And we were all like, well, what sort of moron comes up with something like that? Because that's just utter crap. You know, there was still blood in her system. It's just that, you know, it wasn't moving. And you can still get an accurate, I'm going to say that again, you can still get an accurate blood alcohol level from testing the liver and from testing the fluid behind the eye. It can be done. So when Megan came out with this, they can't do tox because of that, it was just a joke. And then we see this exact same thing said in a professional report. Like, what the heck? These guys haven't even got the knowledge to find out how a tox report is done. We have Barbara Butcher at one point in time saying on Duty Ron, yes, you can get an accurate tox report even after all that time in the water. And yet in this report they're saying, oh, we can't do tox because, you know, there is no viable blood in the system. What's going on here? Is this really a professional report? Or is it, this is just, it seems like a joke to me. And then the final slug from them. They're saying speed was a factor. They're saying that the cause of the accident was speed and impairment. The vehicle was in neutral. How do they know that speed was a factor? How can they say impairment was a factor when you look at the levels in the toxicology report? She didn't seem impaired. So I am going to take a few more days to just get all this settled in my brain before I start digging into this report. Because on one hand, I feel like just throwing my hands up in the air and going, oh, stuff it, you know, what's the point? But there are so many things that, yeah, on the surface, you could look at this report and go, okay, it was an accident, shut the book, move on. But then when you start to think it through and you start to use a bit of logic, which apparently these CHP guys lack, then you start to see all the problems that exist with this report. So I will come back and I will do shorter videos where I break up different parts of this report. So stay tuned for that. So thanks for listening. If you're new, hit subscribe, hit like, and leave your comments below. What are your thoughts on this CHP report if you've actually seen it? Or what are your thoughts on what I've discussed here in this video?